When it comes to acquiring knowledge, what we tend to do is we listen, we try, we concentrate really hard, then we try again. We often will make mistakes, we'll then correct them, and we'll learn together. So those things are really important. We need the students to be able to listen. We need them to make attempts and to try on their own. We need them to concentrate. We need them to try again. We know they'll make mistakes, and they need to know they'll make mistakes, and they know that's okay. And we need to create like an environment that really is welcoming of mistakes, because it's really just part of learning. And the students need to know that, so that they then know, okay, I've made a mistake, that's fine. How do I fix that mistake? And you need to correct them, help them to get there, and know what to do to move forward. So we're going to correct them, because that's part of our learning, make mistakes and then get corrected. And we learn together. It's not just an individual thing. We are designed as humans to really learn with others. And that's something that's going to come up a bit later. You'll see that working collaboratively and in social groups is actually very beneficial for our students when it comes to their learning. Now, there's three different types of memory, or three systems of memory is probably a better way to talk about it. The first is sensory, so that's very, very short, 1 to 3 seconds, what you can see, hear, feel, all that kind of stuff. The next is working memory, and that's really where we're going to spend most of our time throughout this course, because it's in the working memory that we are trying to shift our knowledge into the long-term memory so that we can recall it more easily later. So our working memory really can only handle about 4 to 8 items at any one time, and it really only lasts 5 to 20 seconds before it kind of reboots and goes again. Our long-term memory, though, is very limitless. It has a huge capacity to work and will work frequently and easily, and the more you use it, the better it gets. When we come to thinking about our knowledge, it's important for us to think about thinking really in terms of what's surface and what's deep. So in our surface knowledge, we're going to talk about one idea or many ideas. And then as we start to get into our deeper knowledge, we're talking about relating ideas, making those connections, or extending those ideas. And that's when you start to do your critical and creative thinking or your problem solving. Whereas on this side with your surface knowledge, that's really your content knowledge and your skill levels. Often it will fit into there. I know they will overlap a bit, particularly as you go into relating ideas and skills, but that's kind of a general way of splitting up our surface and our deep knowledge. Within our long-term memory, a major reason for forgetting is actually a failure to learn in the first place. If we don't acquire the knowledge the first time we are exposed to it, then actually we didn't learn it in the first place. And then when we come to it again, it'll be easier to learn the second time. But if it's not in our long-term memory, then actually we didn't learn it. The more knowledge you have, the easier it is to learn. And that is particularly because it means you've got more hooks, more prior information to learn with. And we'll talk about this in a minute, but it's also going to make your working memory able to work with more items, because things are familiar with you and you've got a lot of stuff stored in your long-term memory to be able to draw upon nice and quickly to make your working memory a lot easier. Long-term memory also requires efficient coding and easy access. So as we're looking through our working memory and what we're going to put into our long-term memory and stuff, it's really important that we learn how to code that new information. And often we code it by extending previous ideas. So if we already have some knowledge in that area, we hook it and attach it in. Where does that fit with that? And then extend the idea. Other times we'll just hook it onto some random pieces of information. So if you know a guy called Mr. Baker, you might think of him as a baker with a baker's hat, and that'll help you to remember his name. It can be quite simple, but also can be quite complex depending on what you're looking at. It is easier to shift from working to long-term if the content has meaning and relates to prior knowledge. So if I am talking to you about something that is really of interest to you, so for example, if you are thinking about doing some beekeeping, for example, and you are interested in native beekeeping, and then I start to teach you about native bees and all the different types of native bees and the sugar bag bees that make sugar bag honey and all the different things around that. Because you're interested in it and it has meaning to you, it'll be easier for you to learn. And then the more you get into something and the more you like it, the more prior knowledge you have, and then learning becomes even easier and easier. And so you can see the more you know and the more interested, more meaning that content has for you, the easier it is for you to learn, and the same for our students. If it is something they're interested in and it has meaning for them, it has a real life application, for example, and it relates to stuff that they already know, and you're building upon that, it'll be easier for them to learn. When we're looking at our working memory and our long-term memory, in terms of shifting stuff from our working memory into long-term memory, some of the techniques that are really, really good to help make that transition are chunking. So if you group related ideas together, it becomes easier for you to learn. Rehearsal, so once you're exposed to it, rehearse it, repeat it, refresh it, and recite it. Just keep going over and over it and spread that out so that you're actually getting repeated exposure to it. It makes it more memorable for you. Imagery is also really good. So picture what you're talking about. So like I said with Mr. Baker, picture him with a baker's hat on and you'll be more likely to remember his name. Or maybe close your eyes and picture someone writing his name on the wall. It'll also help you to remember his name. So imagery can be really powerful in memory as well. Mnemonics. So mnemonics really are any memory device, but for example, for what I'm going through here with chunking, rehearsal, imagery, mnemonics, and the next one's going to be elaboration, that makes the word crime. And so that's a mnemonic to help you to remember what I'm going through here with chunking, rehearsal, imagery, mnemonics, and elaboration. Elaboration is when you add meaning and when you use input information as trigger to recall knowledge. So you might have something like, native bees, which actually recalls for you a lot of information because you grew up on a farm, there were bees on your farm, but you also now remember all the other stuff that's related to farming. And so the bees were a trigger for you to remember a whole bunch of other stuff. And normally what we actually do is we train our students to use the syllabus keywords as triggers to then recall all the information that goes along with that, particularly as they get ready for exams or something like that. Now, one of the most important things about this is that crime only works when you use it at the moment of your initial exposure. So when you are first exposing students to anything that they're learning, you should be thinking about how can I chunk this? How can I group related ideas together? Or where am I going to build in rehearsal across this program so that my students are learning something here and then I'm going to repeat it there and refresh it here before they then get ready for their final assessment task or whatever it is you're going to do with them. How can you train your students to use imagery around the content you're giving them right then and there? So you need to be using them as you're exposing the students to it so that they actually learn it the first time and not the second or third time. Now, in terms of storing knowledge, one of the big key things is that what you already know determines what you can learn and how you think. Okay, so people who don't know something don't know what they don't know. They don't know how much they don't know. They don't know how bad they are at that skill if they have no ideas about that skill or no ideas about that content. If you were clueless about the bees I was talking about before, then all that just, sugar bag bees, and you go, what is that? And you might have to Google it and find out, look it up, because it's not got anything to do with your prior knowledge. You don't know anything about that yet. Whereas if you already knew stuff about that, that's like, oh yes, and you're going to start taking in information. So what the students know already, that prior knowledge, will determine what they can learn next. So it's very important as you're designing your programs and stuff that you think about finding out what your students already know, and that will be different for each student. So they might learn the same, but what they already know might be different, and so you might need to adapt things to suit their interests, to suit things to make sure that it's meaningful for them. And so you do that, some kind of formative assessment to get some prior knowledge information, and then you can build upon where they are to get them to where you want them to be. When it comes to storing information, there are a few different ways that humans will put that information into their head. Now, one of them is called strings, and strings is when you acquire knowledge through focus and repetition. So you might do something like look, say, cover, write, and then check. That's a very simple process, but that's a string. It's a repetitive thing, and you're focusing on stuff. It might be flashcards would be a strings process as well, where you are looking at something, trying to remember it, it's covered up, flip it over, check that you got it right, and then if you did, you move on. Those types of things, they're strings. Next is ideas. Now, ideas are concepts expressed in their own language. So It's the student taking whatever you've taught them and expressing it in their own words, in their own kind of phrasing, and not just copying it from a textbook. Ideas are normally acquired through 3 to 4 exposures in different contexts. So you might expose them to a particular topic. So you might expose students to the processes of water and how it goes through evaporation into the air, becomes clouds, goes towards the mountains, it rains on the mountains, it goes down the rivers, into the ocean, it evaporates. That cycle of the water cycle. It might take the students 3 or 4 different exposures. So you might expose them to that by reading it, by watching a video, by creating some kind of artwork themselves that depicts it, by going through a social discussion a bit around it or something like that. Maybe they'll go and actually experience some rain that's falling on them and think about where they are, why it's raining at that time, where's the closest ocean for the water they come from, where are the deserts in Australia, all those types of things. Different contexts for them to learn the same information. Now, meaningful ideas need to be linked with previous knowledge and enable elaboration. So that means that prior knowledge that the student has, they need to be able to link whatever's new to that knowledge and extend that knowledge. And then they'll get the next lot of new knowledge, hook it in, and it extends. And you're essentially building and building, enabling that elaboration of knowledge. Now, one way to really help students to get some ideas is asking, why is that fact true? And it helps them to link new ideas with networks in their own mind. So if I think something's true, why? What is it? And that will force them to go through their brain, find things they already know, and link that new content, that new idea, to what they already know, or that prior knowledge. Because it doesn't have to be exactly what you want in terms of the process. It could be them linking it to stuff that's actually out of the box. It's a bit from left field, and you wouldn't have planned it, but that's how they're going to get it. So helping you to really understand your students. If you know their interests, if you know where they're at, if you know where they want to be, then you are the best person equipped to really help them to get there. Another way that we build knowledge in our brains is using schemata. Now, schemata is basic units of organization and structure for knowledge. So basically when you start to put things into boxes and categories, and you're segregating, this is that kind of content, this is that content. So physics might go here, my English essay writing might go down here, my artwork is up there, and what I'm talking about with bees might be over here. But it's how we organize and construct our knowledge. Now, that's not always going to be segregated. That can also be very interwoven, interlinked. In fact, the more you interlink it, the better you'll remember it. But you want to allow facts, concepts, and sequences to become meaningful. So as you're trying to build a scheme in the person's brain, you've got to find out, okay, your facts and your concepts, let's make them meaningful for them and let's sequence them together. Schemata are also gradually refined over years. So as we're putting things into boxes and we're categorizing and we're structuring our knowledge, if we were exposed to something new, we use that, if it's something that's true, to then rejig what we already have. So it's really important that we think about the schemes that the students are using to build their knowledge. And schemata also hinge on contrasting successful and non-successful thinking, and then making adjustments. So if I'm looking at something, this is really like scientific exploration. If I look at something that's a fact and I'm doing an experiment and it shows that what I think is a fact is actually not working, then I rethink what's going on. I might come up with another theory or whatever it is to explain what's going on, or maybe I've made a mistake in my experiment. Constructing knowledge, we also like to use models. So models kind of allow an if-then hypothetical type of thinking. You're creating a model for the students to really build into. It's kind of like a scaffold. It increases the knowledge base. It's really better for problem solving than it is for creativity. So if you're helping to create scaffolds and some kind of guidance, it's going to help the students to get really good at problem solving. But if you want them to be creative, or if they're at the top end of their thinking, scaffolding and models are not going to be helpful for them. You need to remove them, because that's where their creativity is going to come in, and they're going to come up with the best ways for how they're going to construct that piece of writing, or how they're going to build a particular thing, or how they're going to go about their scientific exploration models, because even that can become very creative in the way that it's done. When we're looking to construct knowledge too. It will improve through exposure to competent individuals displaying abstract thought. So think maybe of like some collaborative group spaces where students are actually modeling for other students what things look like, or when you as the expert teacher might be up there modeling and providing worked examples, or providing success criteria but also showing them an example of what success looks like, will really help them to develop that thinking and construct the models and ideas inside their minds. Next we come to procedural, which implies a heads-on approach to developing our knowledge and understanding. So it is particularly increased by social interactions that clarify problem-solving strategies. So when we're talking to other people, what's going on here? How can I fix that? If you have a problem, when you start to talk to other people about it, it has a huge impact on helping you to find a solution, or even finding the best way to go about finding a solution. And so those kinds of procedures are really good to helping our students learn as well. It's also increased by studying partly worked examples. So if you start to provide your students, you may have provided them with a worked example already, but now give them a half worked example and get them to finish it, and then a quarter worked example and get them to work it all the way through, and then do it by themselves. That will really help them to acquire that knowledge faster. Now, procedural is slow. It requires a lot of feedback and extended practice. So making sure you give your students lots of time to get the information to start with, go through and practice a lot, get lots of feedback from you or from each other, and then extend that practice. So they need to just keep going and going until they get it. And that really is very important when it comes to our learning. They make mistakes, they get feedback, they improve what they're doing, and that's what you want as kind of a cycle within what you're doing in your classrooms. And backwards training can really help. So that's backwards training is when you're going, here's a perfect example, and now I want you to produce something very similar. These are the steps I took, but in reverse for how I got there. Now I want you to think of what you're doing, which is going to be slightly different, but you're going to build on a similar step process to get there. And so that might be some scaffolds to help them get there, or it might be questioning to help them to process and get the right questions in their mind, or to come up with the right ideas to do critical thinking, or to work out what they might do to create something, or whatever it happens to be. The procedural aspect of that is really important to help them with their knowledge.